Today we are talking about blessings. Now, blessings are, in my opinion, in a bit of a weird spot in Smite. I originally thought that they would get further changes down the road and that they were just rough drafts of what they're supposed to be at a later point, but it turns out they were pretty much the final versions. There were minor adjustments to some of the blessings, but overall they somewhat stayed the same. I will focus on the blessings for Conquest here. I know there are the extra blessings for other modes, but as your default blessings can be used in other modes as well, and there generally is more of a logic to talk about the part of the game that is where the game's balanced around. I will mostly focus on Conquest in this one. In a way, ironically, I think the introduction of blessings into Smite was a blessing and a curse. On one hand, one very obvious thing in terms of blessings should be clear. Blessings make balancing the game easier for Hi-Rez. With only 5 blessings being available, there isn't that much wiggle room for trying, well, unconventional tactics that would lead to overthrowing the balance in unexpected ways, and instead you are just kinda starting with the same items in most situations, and most guards make use of the particular item that is basically assigned to their role. As such, when one of the blessings seems to be underperforming, it is relatively easy to buff it, or if it's overperforming, it's relatively easy to nerf it, as that was for example the case with Warrior's Blessing, to bring it more in line with other blessings, both in a positive and negative way basically. And not only that, I think Hi-Rez has also finally found the sweet spot for pricing with the blessings for any sort of starter item, which obviously also goes hand in hand with other items being a little bit cheaper in the early department to make that possible. But with 700 gold, you're able to spend enough gold on another item or multiple other items to get use out of that. And you also don't spend too little on the blessing itself, so that, well, you would be able to build multiple if that even was theoretically possible. That's the other thing, that is not possible. Through the restriction to one blessing, weird combinations of blessings, or starters rather, as it used to be the case before, aren't really possible anymore. Some of you may remember that iRefer used to build up to 4 different starter items at some point because they had relatively good value for a low price tag and could be utilized in that way. With blessings having all these restrictions, like not being rebuyable and you just buy them once at the start of the game and then only buy one of them, that's all a thing of the past. So it is ensured in a way that these items are bought early, also because of the stacking mechanic, and that they can only be utilized for that purpose. I know I'm listing this as a pro here, we will talk about the con part of that too, obviously. Last but not least, I also think that each of these blessings has found the archetype of what that role needs. I can't think of a situation where you'd be completely wrong to build the starter item that is required for your role. Now obviously, if you were in solo and playing an assassin, you wouldn't want to build Assassin's Blessing, but rather Warrior's Blessing, that's implied. But Warrior's Blessing is good for solo, Mage's Blessing is good for mid, Hunter's Blessing is good for the ADC of any sort, Guardian's Blessing is good for the support, and Assassin's Blessing is good for the jungler. So that works out as intended. If a beginner picks the blessing corresponding with their role, then they will be fine. If they pick it corresponding with their class, they might have problems, which I think is a bit unfortunate in terms of the naming. Hi-Rez could have gone the extra mile here and named the blessings by their role and not by their class. So you call it the Jungler's Blessing, the Solo's Blessing, the Mid's Blessing, and the Carry's Blessing, which for some beginners may also, again, in another way be misleading, and it also doesn't sound as nice, but it would be a bit more clear for most, I think, and it would certainly help a little bit of the confusion with people picking, for example, Assassin's Blessing for an assassin in solo. But we've talked about the positive aspects for a while now. Let's actually look at the other side and look at the cons of the blessings, because there are a few. Now, the first obvious complaint is that it dumbs the game down. I am kind of not too concerned about that. There will always be players in video games that are looking to min-max, that are looking into builds and learning about them, and if you're on this channel, there's a good chance that you are one of them. But there will also always be players that just play the game, that just log in, build the recommended, and go about their day that way. And if they want to have fun that way, that's fine. And for me, as a player that likes to look into builds, it's technically helpful if players have very easy build paths that are relatively effective. They shouldn't be stupid effective and shouldn't always be better than all niche options, but it's good if players can log in, play the game, build something along the lines of a recommended tree or some very simple, straightforward items like these blessings, and be okay that way. It will in return help the rest of their team, players like me, to not be completely frustrated with them because of their build, which hinders their performance maybe if they're otherwise a good player. Yeah, sure, you can always make things more complicated for the sake of creating some elitist community where everyone thinks they're super smart, and then you end up with something like Paragon where you have a completely weird item system and the game just dies, or you end up with something like Dota 2 more specifically, which is a great game but will probably never be as successful as League of Legends again because it has a much higher entry barrier. I think it's good if there are complicated options that make your character stronger, but it's also very good if you have a straightforward, easy path that is dumbed down for people that don't want to involve themselves in the numbers. So I'm really fine with blessings not being complicated and maybe dumbing the game down a little bit. You're not going to win a Nobel Prize for your build in Smite either way. But what I think is sad in that context is that it also takes away variability from builds. There's just not the option to choose between Soulstone or Sense of Time depending on your character and optimize your stats for your character or the passives of the item that way. Alternative options are super rare. They exist. They are not completely non-existent. For example, we have seen people build Warrior's Blessing in support for a more aggressive playstyle, or build Guardian's Blessing in solo with very defensive characters for a little bit of extra farm. This is possible, and it's something that gives us a bit of flex, but it's not nearly the same flex as we had before. I think Death Toll was, in its concept, an annoying item. The flat healing was something that was definitely problematic and made certain characters with this item way stronger than others, based on AoE swings, their attack chains, and other things. So I understand why Death Toll was removed. But at the same time, some characters just took a massive hit through this. Basic attack-based solo warriors just get pushed out by the fact that they're not as good with Warrior's Blessing as sustain-based, ability-based guardians or warriors. Likewise, dot-based solos aren't as successful because they will always be countered by Warrior's Blessing no matter who they're playing against. And that is okay that this counter exists, and this is something that we had with Mark of the Vanguard before. But before, building Mark of the Vanguard was a trade-off. You traded early aggression for early defense, and now the early aggression items don't look nearly as appealing for solo anymore. You will probably hardly ever see anyone go for Mage's or Hunter's Blessing on a solo laner, because Warrior's Blessing on the characters that benefit from it is just too strong for that. And talking about blessings being too strong, how often do you actually see somebody not going into a blessing? We've seen some attempts of going into Soul Reaver tier 2, at least before the nerfs, in mid lane with the Scordia for example, and there are some other outlier cases where you would opt into a defensive choice, specifically geared to your opponent for example, but overall we will almost always see starters, even with builds like Transcendence right after, even with stacking items where it would make sense to go into them as quickly as possible, the Hunter's Blessing will still be built beforehand. Blessings are just stupid good right now. They are supposed to have a lot of early value because they don't upgrade, but I'm not sure if they really should have as much value as they have now. And last but not least, I don't really understand why there's still this strange imbalance between the blessings. Now, Mage's Blessing is one where I'd say this is fine, this is good, right? This is right in the middle. It has a little bit of ability bonus damage, it has some CDR, and it gives back some mana, so that's nice, but you're probably not gonna keep it into late game. You will sell it when there's something better. Guardian's Blessing is in a somewhat similar boat. It has some nice stats, but the extra gold makes you want to keep it longer, the extra gold per 5 seconds. So it is a more valuable one, but still one that I would say is balanced just based on how the role of a Guardian is in general. Warrior's Blessing, again, I think limits solo very much in what guards are picked, but is essentially not bad. Then there's Hunter's Blessing, which is somehow better than the other blessings for some reason on the characters that can utilize it well, simply because it scales the basic attack damage, meaning that it also scales with crit. So if crits become meta, then Hunter's Blessing will be such a staple until late game because it gets so much more amplification than other items. You simply get 30 bonus damage out of it when fully stacked, and then on top of that, this can be doubled by crit to 60 bonus damage, While this thing also still has 15% extra attack speed, something that allows you to maybe skip another attack speed item until late game and just go like right into Executioner. Then it also gets MP5, as if the rest of the stats wasn't enough. So between all these stats, I feel like this item is almost as good as Boots, which are double the price, obviously without the stacking. But it doesn't seem justified looking at the other blessings. And then last but not least, there's Assassin's Blessing. And Assassin's Blessing is, well, a necessary evil, I would say, because obviously the sustain and everything that comes with it is needed for most junglers. But the item itself, compared to every other item, every other blessing, does not provide you with much for fighting at all. It just has bonus damage against monsters, healing from monsters, and mana restoration from monsters. Upgrading it gives you 10 penetration. Now what would you rather have? 30 basic attack damage extra per basic, 10 MP5 for extended trades, and also 15% attack speed, or 10 penetration? I think the answer is very clear here, and I'm not quite sure what causes Assassin's Blessing to be weaker to all the others when it comes to combat situations. It's not exactly hindering Assassins at the moment. Assassins aren't completely weak, so it's kind of there, and it will be there just because Assassin's Blessing as a sustain item is so needed in the jungle, but it just doesn't really compete with the others in later stages of the game, and it's definitely something you would consider selling earlier if it wasn't for the sustain. Sustain that, again, doesn't help you in fights at all. And just for a quick look over the pond, look at Skirmish's Saber, or the other jungle item that you can build in League of Legends if you'd like to. They have two jungle items, two different ones, that you can only build if you build Smite, their version of Hand of the Gods, what we used to have. So you're clearly a jungler if you build that. And they have two upgrade versions out of that as well. So this would make an item like Assassin's Blessing especially more interesting, but it's something that could be considered for other starter items as well. Just give them an option to be upgraded later to stay useful in a way. I think that's more interesting than having to trade the item out later, and I'd rather have some flex options of what I can choose when my item becomes at a later point, other than just having stacks that lead to one stat every single time. But that's just a quick side thought here. I overall think that blessings aren't terrible for the game, but I feel like they still need some work. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to sub button with the bell, it really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.